I want to tell you, we have an all-star lineup tonight. Thiru Vignarajah, former Deputy Attorney General of the state of Maryland, Attorney Ben Crump, trial lawyer for justice and founder of the national law firm Ben Crump, and Steve Laffey, no slouch, former presidential candidate and populist conservative, and we welcome them all to the broadcast. Let me start with my in-studio guests. Thiru, where did the left go too far? And what are the lessons they're still not learning today?
You know, I think most of America is actually in a consensus spot. Nobody wanted to see George Floyd killed the way he was, and the police officers that were responsible should have been prosecuted and condemned. But the left then started talking about abolishing the police. We had example after example of where there was a common sense place where the Democrats, my party, had the right position, and then the extremists in our party took those positions and made them caricatures, made them easy for Republicans to make fun of. And I think it's been a real problem for the party and for the nation.
What about marriage equality?
It's another great example of where marriage equality made all the sense in the world, wanting to make sure that people are not discriminated against, to make sure that they have the same. The notion that what comes next is that transgender athletes ought to be permitted to compete against middle school girls, that's not an obvious jump. And when people make the debate that used to be a legitimate and valid one about one of these extreme positions, it cuts from the credibility of the entire party. It cuts from the credibility of the entire movement.
Attorney Crump, how do you respond to what your fellow Democrat has just laid out about the Democratic Party and extremists?
Well, I think extremism is bad for either party. I agree pretty much with all the things and points he made, because you have to, when you think about what Dr. Martin Luther King fought for so hard, is what common ground can we have? There are enough things to divide us. The great leaders are people who can bring people together. And I think that's what we need now most in America, leaders that can bring people together.
Well, let me ask you, Attorney Crump, how do you think the Supreme Court Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard decisions contributed to the decline of DEI programs?
Well, I think certainly you look at these cases and they do make you scratch your head. I'm a civil rights lawyer, so I obviously believe that we have to do more to make sure we have diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's good not just for the country, but it's good for people to interact with people who are different from them, who have different opinions from them, people who they might can learn from. And so I think when you start to do things that are an impediment to people being able to experience diversity in all walks of life, then that's when you see people start to, unfortunately, be divided by ignorance because they don't know one another.
So why do you think major corporations like Meta, McDonald's, and Walmart now view DEI as a hindrance rather than a benefit?
I was very proud of Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase Bank, saying that he is standing firm on diversity, equity, and inclusion because he thinks that it's good for business, it's good for companies to have different people at the table and not have just a monolith of people at the table. And I think that there is a fundamental, misconception about DEI. I mean, when you think about the words themselves, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are virtues to a moral society. And I don't know how it became a bad word, but I know we have to fight to respect each other's differences. That's what America was created, a lot of different people coming together to form a more perfect union.
Well, Thiru, Is the move away from DEI a return to meritocracy, or is there another underlying motivation?
You know, it seems so political and it seems so performative. It seems like a company wants to signal to the broader community that it's with Trump or is not with Trump, and so they take these positions. Diversity is something that is celebrated in this country for years. It is something that we aspired to ever since we desegregated public schools. We wanted our children to learn with people of different backgrounds because we thought that was valuable for all children. And we want universities to have diverse perspectives. We want people to come in. The notion that that then means that you are going to end up with least qualified people, it's just not true. And unfortunately, to the extent that diversity is a virtue and a value, there's always a value at stake. When the Trump administration puts in place a number of people and it looks like those are the people that are most loyal to Donald Trump, that's the value that he's exalting. And that's okay. Loyalty is an important value. But if he chooses to do loyalty over diversity, that's his prerogative. But the notion that an institution appreciates the importance of diversity to their student body, to their institution, I think that's got to be respected and is in the proudest traditions of this country.
Well, Steve Laffey, how does the argument that DEI is a form of quotas by another name align with previous civil rights legal battles?
I don't know if they align, and it's so great to be with all of you today, and I don't know if they really align, but I think I can agree. Listen, I'm not for the DEI stuff. I'm for meritocracy. But the meritocracy just doesn't mean who has the highest SAT scores. So you would have 75% Asians at Harvard. That wouldn't be how you would admit people. That's not how I was admitted at Bowdoin or even at Harvard Business School. It was a lot of things that you include in the table. And so when you say, wait a second, we're going to take this kid from the Bronx. He's got some pretty good scores. He can do the work. Let's take a chance on this guy. That is including people. So you just don't take people whose parents went to the school or whatever it might be. But I think what we're trying to get to here is how do you show leadership the way Donald Trump, I believe, is not on this issue by having nothing but basically sycophants around him. And I'm a conservative Republican. I think there has to be a greater message, like let's restore the middle class before it's too late. Let's unite the country over restoring the middle class. And let's work together, left and right, on policies that will bring back that 70% of Americans, like they did in 1963, would say to themselves, I'm in the middle class. My kid can go to a state school. My wife can stay home at least part of the time, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't exist in America, and that's why we're losing America. And we keep going back to these things, but go back to the CEOs, for example. They just blow with the wind. We don't have leaders like Jack Welch anymore. We don't have these people. They're going to go, DEI, yes, I love it. I love it. Thanks so much, Joe Biden. Send me some money, says Intel. They're going to go back for Donald Trump. I'm going to go to the meeting. They're going to contribute $500 million to his inauguration? Huh? What? That's not helping the country, folks. So we can't. The people in this room on this show could get together and figure out how to get some of this stuff done. But now we're just swinging back and forth. As the original talker said, how did we get to men swimming and women's swim events? That wasn't very good.
And we'll be back. We'll be back. So, you know, Thiru, bureaucracy is bloated, so out of control. There's a lot of that is fraudulent about government. Now, you and I may agree about how government needs to be reined in. We probably would not have chosen a chainsaw, but maybe a scalpel. But you cannot argue with the fact that whatever the approach is, this is necessary, and hopefully that government can be more efficient and more effective. But you cannot run government the way you run a corporation. Government is not in the business of turning profits. Government is in the business of serving people.
You know, there's also a lesson from the private sector for what you do when you try to turn around institutions. You know, there are turnaround CEOs who come into bloated companies that are failing. They don't fire all 10,000 employees. They bring in a couple of strong leaders. They identify middle management roles, those 200 most important middle management roles, and they strengthen the people that should be there, and they replace the ones that shouldn't. That's how you change an institution. Abolishing the Department of Education because you have disagreements with the Department of Education is like abolishing the police because you think police reform is needed. Those chainsaw approaches, to use your phrase, is exactly what I think people are worried about, shows a lack of appreciation of how government works. This is not how you effectuate change in any institution, public sector or private.
Steve Laffey?
I would say that I personally would like to end the Department of Education, but I think President Trump is going about it in all the wrong way. Whether it's a chainsaw or what it would be, I think the right way to do it is through Congress. Now, I know there's an argument. Congress does nothing. It's true. They'll walk all over them, do executive orders. Biden did them. Now we're doing them. I think that's the wrong way. I think you take a giant issue, you bring it to the American people, and you say, this is what's going on. And this is what has to happen, not only to get better education, number one, for our children, which should be out of the public schools, in my opinion, and you debate it and then you vote on it. But the president is too lazy to do this. And this is why I think a lot of this will start to backfire on him in the next month or two.
So how do you trim government, rid it of inefficiency, make sure that employees are not double dipping, and make sure the government is not going to ever be perfect, but how do we make it better?
I mean, let's distinguish between asking everybody to come back into the offices. That is something that you can debate, but that is a measured approach to how to restore some efficiency and efficacy, if that's what you think is happening. Turning around and sending a tweet on Saturday that says, tell us what you did the last week in 5 bullet points, and if you don't respond, we'll treat that as a resignation, is not how you go about effectuating a new culture. You want to create a culture of performance, of efficiency. You do it in a humane way. You do it in a way that you exalt and respect the people that have been civil servants.
But his cabinet secretaries like Patel, like Pete Hegseth, and Mark Rubio told their employees, just totally ignore that, pay it no attention.
I mean, that only reveals, in my mind, a level of dysfunction that you don't want to see out of the White House. Look, I want to be proud of our country. I want to be proud of our president. I want to be proud of our White House. And when we look like we don't know how to run a lemonade stand, that we issued an order to everyone in the country that by email over the weekend, and then 3 major secretaries just disagree with it, that doesn't inspire confidence that the president of the White House knows what it's doing.
So Steve.
Yes, that's right.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, that's exactly right. I know that we're going to disagree with, I'm going to agree with the other panelists on a lot of things, but he's exactly right. The way to go about doing it is tell everybody to come back in, do what I did when I was at Moore & Keegan. Every division I took over in the private sector, I met with every single person. Now, maybe you can't do that tomorrow. I went to some people and said, listen, you can't do your job. We have to get rid of you. But here's how we're going to do it so your family's not, out on the streets. There's a way to do it. We need a lot less people in the federal government outside of our military. I agree. But the way to do it is to go department by department and go through with the people. I'll give you one example. When they gave you 8 months of pay for signing a piece of paper, guess who signed first, Armstrong? The guy who was retiring a month from now, who got 7 extra a pay. Guess who signed the paper to take his resignation second? The most talented guy who got a higher paying job in the private sector. Guess who didn't sign? The one who maybe be the worst worker. So it was the totally wrong way of going about doing it, as if these people had never worked in the private sector. It's befuddling to me because these things won't stick.
Attorney Crump, your thoughts on Ukraine and Russia, the fact that people on both sides continue to die, and yet in the past administration, there was no resolution in sight. Trump and his team are cutting out the middle person, Europe, and they're saying, look, we need to bring an end to this conflict. It's not that I favor Russia, of Vladimir Putin. I just want to negotiate with someone where we can take the bureaucracy out and bring an end to this. And it doesn't help the rhetoric of calling Zelensky a dictator. Obviously, Trump has a very gangster approach, but I think many people agree that they didn't want to see their son lose another, have their child die in this conflict. They would like to see it come to an end.
Well, before I respond to that, Armstrong, I did want to say I got a lot of calls from a lot of my friends in the military who were just shocked. We talk about meritocracy, but the fact that he got rid of a general who was very qualified, I mean, has served, checked all the boxes, and then he replaced him with somebody, and I understand when people try to make excuses where he gets to pick his people. But what if we're going to argue about this meritocracy and try to say that this general was a DI hire? It's offensive to many in the military who say, no, we believe in this general. This general was somebody who inspired us on many levels. So it is very troubling. And I will say, Armstrong, a lot of people are scratching their heads saying, hold on, Russia is our enemy. So are we now saying we're going to have a kumbaya moments with Russia against a country who they invaded? People are very confused about what's going on with the Russia and Ukraine matter as it relates to this administration's involvement. It is very, very different from anything we've ever done in America.
You know, is there much of a difference? I know somebody's not going to like this, Thiru. Is there much of a difference between, I mean, listen, the geopolitical landscape has changed since World War II. America can no longer be the savior of Europe. As J.D. Vance said, you got to make an investment. Your mass immigration policy has caused chaos across Europe, which is why, for the first time in ages, you have a right-wing leader elected as the next German chancellor. It's not just happening in the United States, the landscape changes. It's happening all over the world. And it started with immigration, that the crime is out of control. Everyday people don't feel they're protected. They have no recourse because if they defend themselves, they'll end up in jail. At some point, you got to get the message of the constituency that you serve. And many people, including people in the United States, don't want us spending any more money in Ukraine. It's just the reality.
Look, the problem is that the United States has been and should be the pillar of democracy that everybody looks to around the institution. That's who I grew up honoring. That's why I wanted to go into public service, because this was the nation that we could always count on to do the right thing. And as Mr. Crump said, when one of our enemies invades one of our allies, we stand with our allies. By the way, when Hamas invaded and attacked Israel, it was appropriate to stand up and stand with Israel and honor their right to defend themselves. So when we decide that for fiscal reasons, we're no longer going to do what is expected of us because people are tired of it, we have to understand we ran up the biggest deficit in American history under the first Trump administration. It wasn't because of the Ukraine war. It was because of Trump's policies that we ran up that deficit. To then turn around and say, oh, we're spending too much money in Ukraine, I just think it's a little hypocritical to want the world to respect you, to revere you, to fear you, and then say we actually don't have enough to help you.
But what about Europe's accountability and responsibility? Do they not have any role?
So if you want to get Europe...
Are we going to continue to bankroll them?
If we want Europe to step up, there's a lot of different ways to do that. But siding with the enemy of Europe is not the way to accomplish that. It's a game of chicken in an area that needs nuance, that needs sophistication. And I think my biggest frustration on the foreign policy front is it just looks like a college debater is running our national and foreign policy because it looks so ham-handed. It doesn't look like there's any of the nuance that you expect. When you destroy and denigrate USAID overnight, you have lost sight of the fact that that soft power, that diplomacy, is how we have had influence in continents around the world. We don't have to use fear because we have this soft power that we've all been able to exercise. A college kid might not get that, but I expect the president to.
Steve Laffey?
Yes. For example, just take USAID. I'm all for closing this stuff down because about 10% gets to the final recipient. But the way we went about it, and I'm a conservative Republican, right? This doesn't make a lot of sense. Neither does it make a lot of sense for a lot of these things. For example, if President Trump is making a decision, and I think it's partially true, that Europe is now going to be able to defend itself. NATO, European troops have 1.5 million soldiers ready to go, not including America. So Russia's down to less than 1 million. So these things can be said. They can be said that we need a 5-step plan if we want to remain in NATO, and we may not remain in NATO. What's not okay is the way you say, you can't really say with a straight face that Russia did not invade Ukraine, that Ukraine started the war. That no one believes this, and this is what's going to cost President Trump his popularity. So again, we can all agree there's a way of going about doing this. If you want to remove yourself from NATO, if the other NATO countries don't get to 3, I would say 5% of GDP on defense, they are waking up about it, scared, but the way we're going about it is good. Listen, we're being booed in Canada when a basketball game starts. You're going to find, I'm going to be traveling to Europe pretty soon. I don't even know what the reaction is going to be when I get there. It doesn't have to happen this way. We can be a cohesive world power. And here's the thing, to get back to previous, we need to talk about human rights every day, and Donald Trump never does. Let's just sum it up that way. I'm against communist China because there's 1 million Uyghurs, among other things, in concentration camp. I'm against Putin because he murders people, he organizes rapes. He stole 20 to 100,000 kids from Ukraine and took them back to Russia. I'm against all of that. When more people live free, to say it very selfishly, there's a better chance that the Laffey family lives free.
And Mr. Laffey is a proud Republican, and Mr. Crump and I are proud Democrats, and those are areas that we can agree on. By the way, Mr. Laffey, I may also agree with you that if USAID money is not getting to the intended beneficiaries, that is a problem. But the solution to that is to then make sure that that happens. Audits.
Yeah.
You know, in my hometown of Baltimore, one of the biggest frustrations is that we've never had an independent forensic audit of our agencies to find out where the money is actually going. We should absolutely do that. You don't instead just zero out the housing department and zero out the police department and zero out the health department. You actually go do an audit to find out where the money is going, and then you make sure that it gets there. That common ground is how we bring this country back together, because it turns out I think 80% of America agrees with the common sense middle that all 4 of us are talking about.
And we'll be back. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
Let's talk immigration. And back to your argument, there's a process of doing everything to achieve your goals. But I don't think for 1 second, Thiru, you would have a problem with deporting criminals out of this country.
No, I certainly wouldn't have. And identifying those folks that have been convicted of crimes when I was a federal prosecutor, we absolutely thought that was a priority and we did it. But again, this is another example of where that common sense middle doesn't go to the other extreme. My family came over on visas when I was 3 years old. My parents became, city school teachers. I went off to Yale and Harvard Law School. There is an American dream to be pursued by immigrants. But for the immigrants that decided to get here and immediately commit crimes or to endanger community, I don't think anybody's sitting here saying we should allow them to stick around and give them a second chance. The problem is that from there to the extreme position that the far right is taking is just as irrational as the extreme position that the far left takes. You can't have an open border. You can't say anybody can come under any circumstances. We do need to have a process because, by the way, there are people all across Africa and Europe and Asia that would love to come to America too. And so you have to understand that the reason we have process is to actually make it fair to be able to pursue the American dream, to actually make my parents have a chance just as much as a family from Central or South America. But putting in protocols and practices to make sure that people follow the rules, that is absolutely defensible. It's that extreme position on the left and the extreme position on the right that I think is driving us apart.
Attorney Crump, I want to go back. You mentioned the general. I just think that there's one thing that I think everybody is clear on. Everybody is being impacted by the actions of the president and Elon Musk. I mean, even people overwhelmingly who voted for him are asking the Republican members in Congress that you got to do something, especially on these processes of firing people living in fear. I think it's just across the board. I don't think the president just singles someone out because they're general. I just think the president has this idea. They've been planning the fact that he may win the White House again, and they've been planning this. And I think people across the board are being impacted by this. If you talk to anybody, I bet you could find anybody who would have a complaint about the process that's moving along.
Well, first of all, let me say something positive. And that is, I just want to observe for a moment, Armstrong, we have two proud Democrats, me and Mr. Rajah, and two proud Republicans. And we're sitting here having a civil conversation, and we're talking about things we agree on. You're asking questions that stimulate us, that make us think. Isn't that what America is supposed to be? Isn't that why we are so revered by other countries? Because we solve our differences with dialogue and intellect. And it's troubling. It's very troubling when you see that right now it doesn't seem that this administration respects anybody's opinion but their own. When you talk about the firings, I guess the Friday night firings, he fired a black general and a woman. That speaks volumes. And these individuals seem like they had proven themselves above and beyond. But yet, It didn't matter because it seems like every hurdle you tell me to jump, you still see me as a quote-unquote DEI hire. You look at the makeup of the cabinet and you say, wow, that doesn't look like America. America is more diverse than that. But that's not what we're seeing. And that's very troubling to many people to say, well, do I not fit in America? Is that what they're saying? And so I think we have to get back to America where we celebrate each other, the humanity in each other, the promise in everybody. And even though we might not agree on everything, but let's not forget what makes America great. And that is its people and the diversity from all the countries from around the world that came to form this great country. That's what America is. That's what makes America the beacon of hope and justice for all the rest of the world to marvel.
Steve, where is Congress in this process in terms of the checks and balances? Obviously, they've been overwhelmed by the repeated and just fusillade of executive orders, and I think maybe they're just finally getting their hands around it. Certainly the courts have been pushed back, but does Congress have a role? Because we know in the last administration and in the past since Newt Gingrich, Congress has conceded much of its power to the executive branch of government.
Yes, and I think the answer is that they have given away so much power that we don't know their name. I study the papers every day. I may name 25 congressmen. The Republicans just run scared in the House of Representatives because they have an election next year and they think Trump's going to be powerful. The day he's the emperor with no clothes, they'll be all over him. But they need to go to the president en masse and say, we're not doing that. The Constitution clearly says we're supposed to spend money on X, Y, and Z. We're going to spend that money. You need to come to us a bill. We're happy to reduce the size of the government. Every department there's not a department I have approached that couldn't have a 10% cut. We've got to do these things, but we've got to put bills together. They're scared to put bills together. Listen, Lindsey Graham's been around for how long in the U.S. Senator? Tim Scott, name the bill they introduced. I can't remember it. So they're not doing their job. They refuse to do their job. And right now, they are running scared from Donald Trump when they shouldn't. This may be a short-term reflection of the American people right now, though, who haven't changed their mind about the short-termism of the way we sort of live our life, right? We're unhealthy, and we should be healthy. We keep going all day about that. And it really gets back to this immigration thing in a way. Think of how badly Donald Trump has handled foreign policy when we should have started the show with the success in immigration where people aren't coming over. But remember, the real way to handle immigration is to understand what I understand. When I get down to a children's hospital in Denver when my daughter has stage 4 cancer, and I get mad for a second when I see many people, half the people not speaking English. They're here illegally, I think, many of them, at the children's hospital. And then I say to myself, what would I do if I was from Nicaragua or Guatemala and my daughter had cancer? I'd get here somehow, Armstrong. So there has to be the give and take of understanding, even though we know we've got a real problem with illegal immigration.
Thiru, is what we've seen from the president within 1 month of being sworn in unprecedented?
Yes. It is unprecedented, and it is as dangerous and disruptive as if an extreme member of the Democratic Party came into the presidency and started executing the extreme left policies. Can you imagine if the extreme of our party had put somebody up who became president and they abolished the police departments in all of the cities and all the states, that they got rid of the FBI, that they decided to say borders are all open? The other side would be screaming bloody murder.
But let me stop you. But this is exactly what he told you he was going to do when he was running for president.
I mean, I think that some of this is what he said.
It's all of it, he said. Doge, there's no secret. What he was going to do with Elon Musk, what he was going to do with the borders. He let his feelings known about Ukraine. That was no secret. immigration. He saw it as an invasion on the border. I don't know if there's anything that Trump is doing that he did not say he was not going to do.
Well, if AOC ran for president and she announced openly the positions that she took, and then when she got there, she did that, I think the country would be riven with division.
But that's what they voted for.
That is what a small majority.
Not a small majority. He won the popular and the electoral, but it's not a small majority. He won.
But the fact,
and he got more votes than he did for the first time he ran.
So when you win 51-49, a good leader doesn't take that as I can do 100%.
No, I'm not saying that. But all I'm saying, we should not be surprised.
No, we shouldn't be surprised. That I agree with. But when you have example after example of where we could honor the humanity of our fellow neighbors, we could find a moderate and measured middle ground. We talked about 10% cuts out of all of the agencies. I don't think people would be upset if we were talking about that. But to destroy and get rid of an entire institution in the span of a month, I don't know that I ever heard him talking about that.
I never thought that a president could dismantle an agency that was funded by Congress.
Look, this is a subject of lots of legal challenges all across the country, most of which are going not in Donald Trump's favor. So your question is a fair one. I think that he has figured out that might is right, that he can do whatever he wants because he does have the power of the purse string. And I think he also thinks that because Republicans in Congress are running scared, they're not going to stand up to him. He's actually got a majority on the Supreme Court and in a lot of federal branches, so the courts may not be an impediment. They control both houses of Congress and a majority of the state legislatures. It's not obvious who is going to stand up, and the only person who can be a moderating influence are, I think, people like us having these conversations, acknowledging that it wasn't that long ago that John McCain and Barack Obama had a debate that was not only more inspiring in terms of tone and temperament, it was also more inspiring in terms of substance. They actually had substantive disagreements like the ones we're having now. That wasn't that long ago. We were adults when that happened, and it feels like we are in a different America today.
You know, Attorney Crump, you and I have been on these forums for some time. I've not seen you so concerned as you are tonight. If this president continues along this path without any checks and balances, what scares you the most?
Everything. Think about it, Armstrong. You and I, we disagree a lot, but there are some things we hold valuable, like education, and the fact that they're talking about cutting funding to HBCUs. It is very troubling when you think about the fact that they're talking about cutting Social Security, so our parents and our grandparents won't have what they paid.
Now the president has made it clear he will not touch Social Security and Medicare. He's made that clear. On the other issues, I'm not going to argue with you, but on that, for now, it's sacred. It's sacred.
All right, we'll see. Yeah. I will say this, Armstrong. I worry about the Constitution. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I believe that the Constitution is there not for the privileged, because we know that the privileged will be able to get the full benefit of the law. The Constitution was written for the common man to make sure it was protected from its government. I don't know if there's respect for the United States Constitution the way they're eviscerating different things that have become backbones for American democracy. I mean, the Constitution, the elasticity of the Constitution is being stretched in so many ways that I don't know if it will ever regain its former dimensions. And that is concerning. I pray that the congressional members will do their jobs and make the president follow the constitutional restrictions that limit the powers of presidents. so far we haven't seen it.
And we'll be back. I'm Armstrong Williams, your voice, your future. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Steve Laffey, it does seem that President Trump is on a hunt for new territories, whether it's Panama, whether it's Greenland. He seems to be, it's moving at a speed that we've not seen before. But what are the pitfalls of Trump's New World Order?
Well, the pitfalls is that, for example, Panama, nothing happened, right? So he keeps talking about it, then he talks about Greenland. The other pitfall is that countries start to wake up, like in Denmark, and really are not pro-American. You know, when you travel overseas all the time, like I have many years, people really like America. I think that's going to start to change. And the pitfall, of course, in Ukraine, and the pitfall of dealing with some of these leaders as if they don't matter. You know, what's the old phrase, you know, don't step on everybody's head on the way up the ladder because you may need them on the way down. When this turns, and folks, this is going to turn over the budget, which we haven't discussed. The pitfall is he has no friend. He just has sycophants around him right now, right? So it doesn't matter who they are. They just, you know, they say things like they just agree with him no matter what he says. But when that turns, his pitfall will be, I think, his lack of success in foreign policy. I think what's about to happen with these, by the way, I'm against these tax cuts, just so everyone knows. I'm for balanced budget. I'm for the Herman K. 999 plan, which happens to be a 12-12-12 plan today. The congressmen or the senators of the Republican Party and the Democrats have no clue that they're about to become, and Trump himself, the game of musical chairs is about to end. Real rates are starting to rise. You can see it in the market. And so it's not going to get any better, especially when they try to put forth more debt. At some point, you're going to get really high real interest rates. And I think what he's doing overseas will be his pitfall looking back in America. Because quite frankly, among most Americans, no matter what people want to say, they don't want to see Ukraine fail. It's not something they want to see. They don't want to see Zelensky, we know, is not a traitor, a weak person. He's this comedian guy who's like fighting like crazy. Send me a tank. I don't need to go surrender. We know he's like really fighting. Americans know that. So this is all, I'm trying to help Donald Trump here. This is all to the detriment, not today, but 6 months from today. That's the pitfall. These things are not, North Korea was not a success, right? In 2017 or 2018. So the man who signed off on the PPP program, $800 billion, is upset about $100 billion, which is 40% of the stuff that's been sent to Ukraine. Really? Like, he's now concerned about these things? This is his problem. No ideology, back and forth, and unfortunately suffering from narcissism. It's going to come back to bite him in the second term. He's going to wish he never had it, I think.
Ben Crump, you know, while we sit here and analyze the president and his unprecedented speed with executive orders, much of this is because the Democratic Party is in disarray. They have failed to listen to the will of the people. And no matter what you may think about what is going on today, Donald Trump still has the approval of 54% of the American people, which is a majority. What is it that the Democratic Party, the people in Congress, what is it that they need to do to make sure that the president does not do what you perceive that he's doing, my conclusion is that you think he's on a very destructive path?
Well, you know, we're going to find out with all these tax cuts whether Social Security will suffer whether the economy will suffer. I agree with Mr. Laffey that, a lot of things are troubling, siding with our enemy, firing people at the FAA, all these plane crashes saying that it was because of DEI. It's just troubling. I sit sometime and I try to explain to my daughter and young
But you're not addressing the Democratic Party, though.
Oh, no. I think the Democratic Party certainly has work to do. And I think Mr. Raja said it best, extremes are bad on any level. We got to have common sense solutions where we can sit down and have people agree with consensus. I think many times, as James Baldwin said, we can agree to disagree as long as your disagreement isn't rooted in my denial of humanity, my oppression, and my right to exist. And so I have always, I think part of my career has been being able to reach across the aisle and show respect for one another and learn from one another. And most importantly, Armstrong Williams, to come to resolutions where we can have a win-win. Why can't we do that today? That's what the Democrats have to understand, and that's what our brothers and sisters in the Republican Party have to understand. And we have to see ourselves as brothers and sisters because we're all Americans. And I'm troubled by that too, Armstrong. The fact that we don't look at our fellow Americans and see that we're rooting for the same team. And that is a whole different conversation we must have.
Thiru, the tariffs have not really taken effect yet. They have an impact. That will be the real lesson because some people would say the very American worker that the president promised to protect may be the one most disadvantaged in the long run by his policies. It's like the president doesn't understand the unintended consequences of some of his major policy announcements. There is nuance to the way the global economy works. There is certainly room to argue about whether there needs to be a little bit more pushback on this or that. But the way he is doing it in every sector is so ham-handed. It is a chainsaw on so many different issues, and there's no room for disagreement. I think what troubles me most about the approach is we used to be able to agree to disagree. You get a federal judge that rules against you, the first thing that the president, that Elon Musk says is we should impeach him. You get a Republican who says, I disagree with the president's position on that. The first thing they say is we're going to threaten to primary you. That isn't the way this country was able to build and forge solutions. We did that because we found common ground, because we allowed one another to argue and to disagree. There's not room for that today. It is encouraging that there are cabinet members pushing back. And in terms of the email that Elon Musk sent out over the weekend, the president has finally responded to say it's voluntary, which there's a sign that there are people in his cabinet are pushing back. And I mean, Kash Patel said, just totally ignore Elon Musk. He did not try to hide it. So, and listen, you may say that shows that they're not organized, they're not on the same page. Sometimes that dissension is necessary to get his attention.
Look, I think this was an extreme misstep by the president, and thank goodness they were able to stand up. By the way, it's not an accident that it was the Secretary of Defense, the head of the FBI, and the Secretary of State that stood up to him, because those are the places where the most classified information, the most sensitive information. You're telling everybody in all those agencies to share what they did last week? Yeah. I'd love, if I were the Chinese, to hack into that email.
Well, the president said to Elon Musk, you're not moving quick enough, Mr. Trump. And I guess Elon felt he had to come up. I don't know who he's advising him to send out this email and put it in writing like you were in high school or college somewhere. But obviously, everybody knew that was not going to work. And I'm just glad. I'm glad to see this sign, Mr. Mr. Crump, that they are willing to push back for democracy?
I want them to push back a little harder for democracy.
Well, we're only at the beginning. I know we think he's been in office 2 years, but it's been less than a month. It does feel like 2 years.
Well, the fact that Elon Musk, this non-elected person, is running our government is troubling. I mean, it's
Elon, he's not running the government. He's impacting the government. There's a difference.
Well, you ask many Americans today, they'll say he's running.
No, he's not. I know you like that narrative. I know Elon Musk has become the boogeyman, but Elon Musk is not running it. And I will tell I think it's amazing that there's been no sign of conflict between Mr. Musk and Mr. Trump. I just find that fascinating. It really is. I do. Even in what happened in the Oval Office with his kid and what the kid said, which was the disrespect, and still, I mean, it's very interesting. It does seem, Steve, everybody else may seem to be ununified, but it does seem that the Republicans in their trifecta, the president and his cabinet, and he did appoint loyalists to his cabinet. They do seem to be on the same page.
Well, they have to be on the same page because that's how they wanted power over principle. I mean, you have Marco Rubio saying different things about USAID that he said 2 years ago. I have the quotes over here somewhere where USAID was helping people. Now it's hurting people. But the problem for President Trump goes along this line. One, it's one thing to have some dissension, but when the public starts to feel confusion, if it happens too much. Now remember, Trump being a narcissist, and if he could keep it to himself, I'd be happy with it. But the reason that Elon Musk gets away with it, he's the richest man in the world. Trump sees it that way. When it comes to these tariffs, wouldn't it be better to sit down with our allies and say, listen, we're missing this kind of steel plant, or this shipbuilding, or this aluminum smelter, and we get together with Australia, Canada, the French, UK, America, and we say the free world has to have these things to build the kind of stuff that we're going to need for the next war. Instead, I mean, if anybody knew anything about the law of comparative advantage, you would never put tariffs on Canada tomorrow. If Canada's only response, if I was running Canada, Armstrong, it'd be like this. Do whatever you want. We're putting 50% export tariffs on aluminum.
Steve, we are out of here. Steve, Thiru, Crump. We could go for another hour, but we won't. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Your Voice, Your Future. God bless you.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.